Well, I am so pleased to introduce my guest today, Lucy Rycroft, founder of the Hope-Filled Family. You might have seen Lucy on Instagram, where she shares all sorts of wisdom and helpful content around what it's like to be a Christian parent. Lucy is also an author. She wrote all those Mighty Girl, Mighty God books for young children, and she has done some books for grown-ups too. I'm not sure how she has time for all of this, being a mum of four and a minister's wife, as well as a part-time teacher. But I'm hoping she will share her secrets with me today as we talk about the role that parents play in the spiritual formation of their kids. So, Lucy, thank you so much for joining me on Hope Cake.
So nice to be here. Thank you, Joe. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, the Hope-Filled Family is your website, and it is packed full of wonderful resources for Christian parents. I've had a good snoop around, and it's really great. But it started as a blog, didn't it, when you were already in what I would describe as a very busy season of life with a 2-year-old and a baby. So let's talk about that. Why did it feel important to you to start blogging in that wild season of life?
Yeah, so it was crazy. I was a stay-at-home parent, which maybe took some of the pressure off, but I had a 2-year-old and a baby, and I just felt this real compulsion to blog. I set up my blog, and it was many months before I actually wrote my first post, but it kept coming back to me. It was this kind of nagging sense of like, this is something I've got to do, and really it came from this kind of, I don't think it was a picture from God necessarily, but a kind of like almost premonition that I had, this sort of image I had of myself 20 years down the line, having raised these kids with a faith that had stayed stagnant, if you like, it was kind of in a glass jar, and it hadn't died, because I felt I wasn't doubting my faith at all. I wasn't doubting the existence of God and the reality of Jesus in my life, but it hadn't grown. It hadn't kind of been prioritized in that season because I'd found, I loved being mum, but I found it all consuming,
Oh, yeah.
It just took up every ounce of my energy and my time. My spiritual disciplines I'd had before kids, they got thrown out the window. It was like a totally different season for me. So the blog was really my intentional accountability. It was my way of saying to God, okay, God, I want to see my faith grow in this season. I want you to grow me. And I know it's not going to look like what it looked like before. So if I start to write about and kind of intentionally notice the things you're doing in my life, that you're doing in my kids' lives, that you're showing me and teaching me through my children, through being a parent, then I think maybe you will teach me, you will grow me through that process. So it kind of almost became like a spiritual discipline. And not that it was a regular thing, like, every night I would do it or every week. It was just when something came to me. But that was what kind of started this sense of like, I don't want my own faith to just stagnate in this season. I don't want family life to be so consuming that I'm not 100% going for what God wants me to go for in my life and kind of to become the person he's created me to be.
Yeah, I love that. And you're right, it is completely all consuming. I remember when I had my first son, I was like, oh, I didn't know he was going to take up quite so much of my time.
Yep.
And I love that intentionality around your own faith. Do you think it's important to look after your own faith first before you try and disciple your kids?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Like one I've thought about a lot because I'm very much into family discipleship. The blog has sort of, in some senses, it's not changed its vision from 14 years ago when I started it. I'm still all about discipleship, but I think in those early days when my children were so young, it was more about my discipleship. And now that as my children have grown older and I've been looking for resources for them and that kind of thing, and started to write resources myself, it's become for our children as well, and maybe more focused on our children. But there is still that sense of wanting to encourage and equip parents. And we have that lovely image, don't we, about the oxygen mask. We often talking about like mental and emotional health of parents. You put on your oxygen mask first. If there's any trouble on the plane, the instructions are always put your own mask on first, and then you'll be able to help your children with theirs, because there's no point. It's no good fiddling with theirs and, not having any support yourself. You just won't do it. Time will run out, and, and you won't do it effectively, and things could end up quite disastrous. And it's important, we know that for our mental and emotional health, we can't be in a good place to parent our children if we don't look after ourselves, physically as well. But it's something that we don't often talk about, or certainly I don't hear a lot of people talk about spiritually as well. But it is an analogy that I have borrowed and used quite a lot, that actually, by God's grace, even when we're not in a great place with him, we can still disciple our children. I totally believe that. But I also believe that it's a lot easier when we are in a good place with God. So absolutely, I think focusing on our own discipleship in ways that work, for the different seasons of parenthood, it is absolutely vital.
Yeah, because it is different, isn't it? Like you say, you have to find new ways to do things and ways that work in a new season where everything gets turned upside down, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, parenting changes so often, doesn't it? Because kids change so often. So no sooner have you kind of settled into a season, but you're into the next one,
Yeah, right. Yeah, just as you think you know what you're doing.
Exactly. I remember when my kids, so I had a son first, and he was about 1, I think, when he dropped his morning nap. He used to have 2 naps, so.
Gosh, that was really little to drop a morning nap.
Oh no, well, he kept.
Well, my boys were quite sleepy. I think I won't talk about that because people would just be jealous that I had really good sleepers.
Okay. He had a 2-hour afternoon nap, so this is like a half morning nap. Yeah. This is not like his main nap, but like in his first year of life, when he settled into routine, he tended to like get up, have some breakfast, maybe have a little play, watch Mr. Tumble or whatever, and then he'd go back for showing my age. He'd go back for like half an hour or something. He'd just have a little quick nap, like kind of before we went off to toddler groups and all that kind of thing. He'd have like half an hour, and I used to read my Bible. I got into a little habit. It can only have been for a couple of months, probably. I got into a little habit where I read my Bible then, and that was great because I hadn't for months. And now suddenly I was in a phase where, oh, great, this is feeling like manageable. And then, of course, he gets to one, he drops that nap. And I had previously used the 2-hour kind of after lunch. And by the way, I'm so sorry if your kids don't nap. Like, I mean, God's strength and energy to you. This is not anything to do with my parenting that I had kids who napped, but this was just what I could manage with what God had given me. And I used to use that 2-hour nap in the afternoon to get ahead with dinner, to do the jobs, to catch up with life.
Yeah, like you do.
Didn't sleep because you never sleep, do you, when your kids do, despite the advice. And he dropped this nap, and looking back, it's ridiculous. But I actually was thinking to myself, oh my goodness, like when am I going to read the Bible?
Right.
I'm going to have to bite in to my jobs time, which I'd got so used to, and read the Bible then. And so that's what I did. I made that shift. And then, of course, a year later, he dropped that nap, and then we had a baby. She was napping, but he wasn't. So,
gosh.
So then you're like, what do I do now? So I just tell that story, not because it's not about naps, when your kid naps, if your kid naps. Some kids are terrible sleepers. It's just about finding what works for you in that season and being okay with that changing every few months, especially in the early years. There are times when, your kids are all going off to school and you have a bit of a moment sort of just after they've left, but for some of us, we don't have that because we go out to work. If you work from home, maybe you've got some flexibility. If you don't, then you maybe don't. Maybe you have a lunch hour. Maybe they go to bed at a nice time and you get a bit of time then. Maybe it's last thing at night. Maybe it's first thing in the morning. I mean, it works differently for everybody. But there were certainly times when I couldn't have that regular Bible reading slot as well. And I think I just want to kind of encourage parents, like, if you're not in that position where you can sit and have a few minutes each day with the Bible, that's okay. That's okay. There are other ways of like absorbing from God, absorbing what God has to teach you. There are other ways of accessing scripture. There are other ways of drawing into his presence and being aware of him through your day. Loads of other ways. And I think we're almost conditioned into that like daily quiet time thing, which is like, and it's a great habit, don't get me wrong. And I'm in a season of life now where I can have that habit and it's beautiful. It's wonderful. But sometimes I think there is a lot of pressure put on young Christian parents to do that when it just isn't working and isn't feasible. And I'm not making excuses. I'm just simply stating a fact that it doesn't work for a lot of us. And we have to find other habits and other disciplines. And so that, I suppose, is where my blog ended up, as a kind of like, can I help to encourage Christian parents that actually there are other ways they can absorb from God in this season?
What I love about you, Lucy, is that you're so very real about all of these things. And that's how I found you on Instagram, really. Like the posts that you put out are really relatable. They really make me feel seen. And they very much remind me that even in the sort of normal everyday messiness, God shows up, even if we haven't managed to squeeze out 5 minutes to read a Bible passage or just even pray. So I'd love to know, where does God show up for you in your normal, messy, everyday?
So I think right now I'm really lucky to be in a season where my kids are that bit older. They're not waking me up at the crack of dawn. And I can have that little moment before the day starts with God. And I'll be honest and say it's not always very long, but just a few minutes in the Word, a few minutes just committing my day to God, and a few minutes just kind of trying to receive from him as well what he's saying to me about the day. Don't always manage that, but I try if I can. That sets me up for the day, and that's a habit that I'm into now that I really appreciate, because I wasn't for many, many years. But that, as I say, that happens, that works because my kids are a bit older. They don't need me to get them ready in the morning and that kind of thing. I think one thing I'm really grateful to from my experience of parenthood is developing that habit of praying without ceasing. Paul talks about praying without ceasing, and I just think, like, if anyone's going to get to grips with that, it's going to be a parent, because you're constantly talking to God, or you can anyway, and sometimes it's hard to sort of actually sit down and have like a longer prayer time, but we can pray on the run, we can pray as we're pushing the pram, we can pray desperate prayers for our teen who's not home yet, and we don't know where they are, or whatever season of parenting we're in. We can pray those quick arrow prayers, those prayers of desperation, those prayers of acknowledging that God's with us and thanking him for his presence with us. Just even that awareness to, like, not necessarily talk to God, but just be aware that he's with us, and maybe be a bit more intentionally listening out for what he's saying to us in that moment. So God shows up for me, I have to say, through the day. And God shows up as I commit different parts of my day to him, as I commit my work to him, as I commit my family to him. I was really, really encouraged recently. J. John, the evangelist, speaker, writer, said, I rarely pray for more than 5 minutes, but I never go more than 5 minutes without praying.
Oh, that's good.
Like,
that's good, isn't it?
Yeah. I felt validated, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I am in awe of my, there's so many lovely, wonderful prayer warriors in my life who do just sit and pray for hours, often retired people, but that's not an excuse. They're retired, they've got time. I know retired people are also very, very busy, but people who really intentionally carve out time to intercede for the needs of others. And I love that. It's a spiritual gift for sure. And sometimes I feel like I have failed because I can't do that, or I don't do that. But this sense of, like, being aware of God's presence through the day, praying for needs as they arrive. You get that text from a friend and you pray immediately.
Yeah.
Because you're going to forget otherwise if you do it later. So you're just constantly bringing things before God. And that's how God shows up for me, in the little mundane everyday. And he shows up in things like, I wake up on a teaching day and I really can't face 8X this morning, And then it just occurs to me, you're not facing them on your own. Take it to God, bring it to me. It's like he's there saying, Lucy, come on, I'm here. I'm concerned about 8X as much as you are, more than you are. And I can just say, oh, Lord, I really don't want to teach 8X this morning. Please, could you just smooth the way with 8X?
Yeah.
Build those relationships. Would we be able to just have a lovely, happy, peaceful hour together, where they learn music and they love music, which is what I teach them, and we have some good banter, and I can pray those things, and God shows up. It doesn't mean life's always easy, but I know his presence with me in those hard moments, I think, as well as the good moments.
Yeah. And that's so important, I think, through parenting, whatever you're doing, whether you're a working parent or a stay-at-home parent, or whatever it looks like at home. But I think I'm pretty sure you've experienced a bit of mum guilt. I've definitely experienced mum guilt. It is very real. And I'm not excluding dads from this, but mum guilt is kind of the phrase. Parental guilt is perhaps what I should call it. I wonder, do you think Christian parents experience a kind of an extra layer of pressure because they feel so concerned about raising their kids in faith?
Yes. Yeah, undoubtedly. I think there's that extra layer, isn't there? And we respond to it differently, I think. it's a kind of what I spot. I mean, it's difficult. It's a bit taboo, I find, like devotional habits with your kids. It's a bit like money or sex. People don't really want to talk about it often, or maybe it's just that I don't want to pry because I don't want people to think I'm being judgmental in any way. When actually, I'm just really interested in what people do in the home. Partly, if anything, because I'm trying to work it out too. Like I haven't got this sussed. I've got 4 kids. I'm doing this stuff in real time. I'm not like an 80-year-old who's like imparting great wisdom from her lifelong experience of raising 25 Christian children who are now all on the mission field or anything like that. Like I'm trying to do this in the midst of GCSEs and SATs and residentials and homework and reading and all that kind of thing that you're doing with your kids. I think that we feel, we have this sense, don't we, as Christian parents, that like the one thing we want most for our children is for them to know Jesus. Well, I hope we do. I think sometimes it's easy to be swayed off path and think, oh, actually, we just want them to be happy and healthy. Well, we do want those things as well. But actually, I'd rather my kids know Jesus even than have good health, I'd rather my kids be, and that's a horrible thing. Like, I'm not wishing illness on my child at all. But I know that a life lived with Jesus is the answer. And it's 25 million times better than a life lived without. And that's not an exact number. It's infinitely better than a life lived without Jesus, even in your hard moments. And I want my kids to know that in the highs and the lows of life. So I think most of us Christian parents, if you sat us down and asked us what are our dreams for our kids, that should rate quite high up there. And yet we don't do the things we think we should do. But the things we think we should do don't really work often, and that's why we're not doing them. And that, again, that's not to kind of remove all sort of sense of responsibility from parents, but it's just to say, actually, maybe we've got something wrong in discipleship. Maybe
what kind of things do you think parents think they should do?
Well, I don't know, this is my image, but I think that there was a large Christian publisher a few years ago, and they've withdrawn it now, but they had an advert going on social media for family devotions, and they had this lovely kitchen table. Everything was clean, everything was neat, everything was tidy. There was a mum and a dad. There were 2 children. Everyone was quiet. Everyone had their head bowed. Everyone was sat around the Bible, head bowed, hands out, and that didn't do much, I don't think, to sort of restore most Christian parents' confidence in their own parenting ability. Because if you look at that and you think that's what a family devotion looks like, I don't know a single family, maybe one. There's always one, isn't
we all know one. Yeah, there's always one.
Like all power to you if your family is quiet and obedient, and that's wonderful. Like you are no less a Christian parent discipling their kids than any one of us who's doing it in the mess and the chaos. But for most people I know, their kids have a 10-second attention span. They'll be, you try and do it at the meal table. They'll be throwing food after 20 seconds. They'll be under the table. They'll be making, having a fart competition or whatever. Like this is my experience, and this is most people's experience, And loads of us are, I've been parenting 2 adopted children, so we've got trauma added into the mix. Lots of us are adopters, foster carers. We've got kids with SEN. And so we are sort of battling different things like kind of routines and transitions and anxiety levels and all that kind of thing. And we're doing that multiple times. And some of us are doing it on our own. We don't have a partner, or we have a partner, but they're not a Christian. So we're doing the faith stuff kind of more or less single-handedly. And I just really long for parents to know that faith happens in the messy, in the chaotic, in the rush, in the car, on your way to your activities, in the walk, on the way to school. It happens as you're arguing on the way to church even. It happens when you're late. It happens when things are going really well, you're having lovely times together. It happens on holiday, relaxing in front of the telly together, playing a board game together. And it happens when, it's 10 o'clock at night and your 14-year-old tells you they need, random ingredients for their food practical the next day. It happens in those moments, and what we model to our children in those moments is so much deeper, I'm realizing, than what we're teaching them. And again, that's not to say that there's not a place for teaching. There is, but it happens it happens a lot more organically, I think, than parents think. It doesn't have to happen every day. If you open the Bible every day with your kids for 20 minutes, all power to you, that's amazing. if you open the Bible once a week with your children and it's for 1 minute, that's great. You know, if you actually, if it comes into your conversation, your child's telling you about a situation at school and you're able to impart a word of wisdom from scripture into that situation. So, well, actually, you know, Jesus said this, Jesus said that, you know, actually Paul says this, or you know, there was this story from the Old Testament, which is a bit like what you're going through, or whatever. Like, if we can impart that, that's discipleship. You know, praying with our children when they're worried, when they're anxious, just letting them know how much God loves them every night. Even just saying something simple to them when we turn off their light, saying, you know, I love you so much and God loves you even more. You know, even just raising them with that awareness. We had, I don't know if this is the right moment to say this, but we're sorting out all our games at the moment. And I don't know where we've got this from, but I pulled down a game from the games cupboard last night and it's called Revelation, 5,000 Bible questions and answers.
Wow.
Yeah, niche, right?
Yeah.
I have no idea where it came from. I have a suspicion it might be my auntie who like stockpiles loads of this kind of stuff over, or has done over the last 60 years, and gives stuff to us as she's clearing out her own things. Anyway, we were like, what is this game? And it's like got a spinner, it's got little counters, you know, it's actually a board game. Yeah, right. And my husband was like, you know, he's always game for a bit of a laugh. I was like, we don't need to keep this, do we? And he was like, oh, let's just do one, just for fun. So he picks up this set of 10 questions and on all different things of the Bible, you know, how long was Zechariah mute for example, and how many cattle did Job have before they were taken away from, you know, like...
Good grief, wow.
I know, right? Really random question. What was really interesting was, I thought they'd be really hard. This is an old game, right? And I thought this is from the era where, like, kids really knew that Bible, you know. Yeah. What was interesting was, my kids are 11, 14 and 16, 11-year-old twins and 14, 16. And full disclosure, we are not great at reading the Bible with our kids. You know, we try. We really try, but we are not like everyday disciplined people. I do not feel I've given my kids as good a grounding as I should have as a Christian parent. But what I loved was all these questions generated a bit of discussion, and actually a lot of the discussion led to the right answer.
Amazing.
So, like, the Zechariah thing, when they were asked about Zechariah, they were like, oh, you know, they started spouting random answers, you know, 2 years, da, 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 da. And one of them was like, oh, well, it was all the time that Elizabeth was pregnant for, so it must have been 9 months. You know, they like reasoned it, you know?
Clever.
And then there was a verse from Psalms that was one of the questions. And the question was, what... from which book of the Bible does this come? And it was about the Lord being our portion. And actually my 11-year-old just got it, but my 16-year-old chimed in with, oh, I read that the other day. I read that. I know where that is. It's some, and he had a guess at the number, you know. And I was like, this is really cool. And sorry, we've gone a bit off topic. But
no, it's great.
And I just wanted to share that, to say, like, we have not done a great job, you know. My husband's theology trained. He's a vicar. I'm, you know, doing what I do. We have not done a great job. Yeah, you might imagine that we have like trained our kids in the Bible, and we have done what we can. Yeah, but God has filled in the rest, I think, is what I want to just share with people to encourage them. Like, actually, my kids are engaged in the Bible and they do know stuff. They have picked stuff up from the random little habits we've plonked in here or there. You know, that habit that lasted all of 3 days. It was so good. You know, we were reading this devotional, was brilliant for 3 days, and then just like nothing for 6 months. You know, those things go in. You know, the times they're in church go in. The times they're in youth group, in kids' work, they go in. All the people, at the time they go on camp, you know, all these people inputting stuff into their lives, it goes in. And I was so proud of my children last night, not because of their Bible knowledge, but just in like, actually, you're engaging with stuff. You're applying your mind to this. And I love that. You know, you're thinking about it, and we couldn't ask for anything else. So just be encouraged, I think. Do what you can. God fills in the rest. Be intentional, yes. Don't just leave it to chance. Don't just take your kids to church and think, okay, that's it. Don't just leave it to chance. But you won't. If you're a Christian and you're living that and modeling that in front of your kids, you won't just leave it to chance. You know, you will be proactive, and God will bless your efforts and he'll multiply them. And that's what I found anyway over the last decade or so.
Let's talk about church, because you've mentioned that your husband's a vicar, so I guess you know lots about church. I know that when my kids were young, church was a bit of a minefield for us as a family. So two boys who, so let me share this story because it's quite funny. So we used to, the church that we were attending at the time, which was the one that I had found faith in and where we'd got married. And so, we were kind of an established family, if you like. And my boys were about 5 and 3 at the time. And we had these flags that for people to wave in worship, So we had big flags that the grown-ups used to do and little flags for the kids, which all sounds fun. My boys decided to have a sword fight with the flags, which perfectly normal behavior, in my opinion. But one of the older members of the congregation came and whispered to me that they weren't really helping the worship. It was actually a really painful moment for me because my husband, who is a cameraman, had just gone away on a job for a month and left me with the boys, who were quite small. It had been an effort to get into church in the morning, and there they were sword fighting with the flags, and someone made me feel like I wasn't welcome because they were being themselves. I will say that the man did come and apologize, and it was all put right, and the church were very supportive. I'll put that out there now. But it was one of those parenting moments, which was partly hilarious and partly really sad. I feel like kids don't always meet the expectations that are put on them in church, and parents feel the pain of that. So have you got any kind of advice for parents who would have experienced a similar kind of struggle?
I mean, when I first saw this question, because you very kindly sent them ahead of time, my instinct is find a new church. Is a bit drastic, but actually I think sometimes I do want to mention that because I think sometimes, that is the answer. In some situations, I'm not saying it was in your situation because obviously that was resolved and we all make things, different times that are unhelpful, whatever. My kids also sword fight with the flag, so I'm with you there.
Oh good, I'm glad it's not just mine.
Poke each other in the back and all sorts of things. I love those flags. We are fighting a losing battle if we're insisting on going to a church for whatever reason that is not serving our children. Generally, that's not to say there won't be ups and downs. Of course there will be. We're a flawed group of people trying to love each other and do well by each other. So it is really, really important, and it can be really hard, especially if it's a church you've been in all your life, or you got married or whatever. You've got those personal associations with the church, and sometimes we just need to say, actually, this church is not working for my kids, and therefore I will make that sacrifice to find somewhere else that we can settle as a family. And I say that just because I have known of families who have not done that, and the children have disengaged. And actually, as adults, we can cope with the transition of moving to a new church. But our kids, their faith is very vulnerable. They're very vulnerable. And actually, they might not be able to cope so much in an environment that doesn't really welcome them, where they are permanently having to sort of apologize or, behave in a certain way or feel that pressure of expectations on them. So I think I do need to just say, just make sure you are in a church that generally welcomes children and loves your children being there, And then comes the question of, okay, I'm in a church that loves my children, but I still feel conscious of their behavior, whether or not other people are telling me about it. I kind of feel, I've got an 8-year-old and I know they should sit still, but actually they've got ADHD. They find that really difficult and they're running around like the toddlers, and I don't know what other people are thinking of that, and they must be thinking that child needs to sit still, but they really can't sit still for that length of time, blah, blah, blah. And I think what we need to remember as parents is actually, like you said, it's a real effort to get our kids to church, isn't it? Often, a lot of us are doing it on our own. For many years I was doing it on my own, not because I don't have a supportive Christian spouse, but because he was at church first, because he was leading the whole show, So like a lot of us are doing it on our own for different reasons. It's hard, and we need to give ourselves grace. We need to relax if we can. And actually, the most important thing in the church service, our priority should be, when it comes to our kids, their faith journey. How is that service helping them, encouraging them on their faith journey? You know, maybe it's that we just sort of whisper to them at a particular point in the service, like, this is what's happening now. You know, this is where we say sorry to God, because we've done stuff this week that we shouldn't have done, that hasn't honored God. And we're going to say sorry to God. We've done things that haven't honored God, or we haven't done things that would have honored God. And, you know, we're going to say sorry to God for that. Or, you know, people are just singing, or this is what this hymn means. You know, the language is a bit old fashioned, but this is what it means. You know, we can kind of give our kids those little markers through the service. We want them engaging, but that doesn't mean necessarily that they won't be running around, but that does mean that they will have an awareness, certainly from a certain age. I'm not talking about like a 2-year-old, but certainly I would say like primary age children, they should have an awareness of what is going on in the service, however they're engaging. And they might be playing in the corner, they might be reading, they might be fidgeting with a fidget toy, they might be wandering around or whatever. But have in mind your child's faith journey. That's the most important thing. And as much as you can, try to resist the pressure of what you think other people are thinking, because they're probably not as well. Like we always think, don't we, as parents, our kids cry as the loudest or whatever. And I've had people say to me at the end of the service, "Oh, I'm sorry that, you know, my baby was screaming during your worship set or whatever." I was like, I've got no idea. Like, do you know what I mean? I'm like, I can't hear anything else. So yeah, nobody else hears your kids like you do or sees them like you do. Yeah. So relax. It's okay to be open with people about it. It's okay as well. I think, you know, communication is so important. And so often we kind of do ourselves no favors by not talking openly with people about these things. And I think even just to have a conversation, you know, in your conversations with people after church, if you get to have a conversation, because that's another issue with kids, you know, just to say to somebody, oh yeah, gosh, it's a bit, you know, we're in a bit of an energetic season here, you know, kind of make a joke of it, to say, oh, you know, a bit exhausted because, you know, coming to church is a bit like doing laps or doing a marathon or whatever, you know, and just so that somebody sees your heart for it, like people know that you're aware of the situation, but that's how it is. You know, you're not being a negligent parent, or, you know, you're not unconcerned about how your child's behavior affects other people in their worship, but this is where you are. You know, it's hard. And as a church, I think we can grow to learn and understand that. And, you know, I say to my kids at school, there's being a distraction, but there's also being distracted, because often kids will make the excuse to me, or so-and-so was distracting me. And I have to say to them, well, yeah, okay, they shouldn't have been a distraction, but actually you have a decision in that moment whether or not you're going to get distracted. And as a church community, we need to be people who are able to be undistracted in our worship, I think. You know, sometimes we blame the kids for distracting us, but actually some of us adults have a terrible attention span, you know?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
And as soon as a kid makes a noise, we're there, we're like, you know, like, get over it.
Yeah.
You know, kids will make noises. We've got loads of kids in our church, and I'm grateful for every single one of them, because when we came to the church 12 years ago, it was just our older two. They were 4 and 2 at the time. They were the only regular kids, and we used to pray every night for more children at our church. And now the place is overrun with children. I'm never, ever going to complain that a child is in our church. And if I hear anyone complain, I'm going to say to them, 12 years ago, we had no children in our church. This church would have died out. All right. And it's a blessing. Every single child who comes into our family, our church family, dragging behind them an exhausted parent with massive bags under their eyes, like, they are a blessing. Like, the sacrifices that they've made to be with us this morning, we should be so honored and so grateful that they're coming to be with us, you know? And you know, in our church as well, we have an increasing number of adults with learning difficulties. They're also wandering around church. You know, we have a guy who comes up in the middle of the sermon and asks the preacher if he can go to the toilet. I'm not kidding. Okay? And he does it week after week. Like, yeah,
so good.
There you go, Bill. The toilet's over there. You go, you know, and it's beautiful. It's a messy family of God, and it's lovely. It's wonderful, and we wouldn't want it any other way. So if we're not good at accepting children's chaos and mess and noise, then how are we going to be when adults with learning difficulties come into our church? How are we going to be when people with addictions come into our church? How are we going to be when a drunk person walks in off the street into our church and starts to heckle? Like, we've got to be okay with more chaos, mess, noise in our churches. We've just got to. And children teach us that so joyfully and so beautifully.
Let's turn it around a bit then and talk about, like, you're in a great church. They've got amazing kids provision. It's all singing, all dancing. Is that enough? Shouldn't the children's minister be responsible for discipling your kids?
No.
Why not?
Next question.
There's loads of kids workers listening to this going, hooray!
On you.
But tell me why it's not just on the kids minister.
Yes, I was always intending to, of course. Well, we wouldn't go to church and expect that to be it, would we? You know, think of our own discipleship. Do we rock up at church on a Sunday and that is literally the only thought we give to God in the week? I mean, I know it is for some people, but is that the mark of a disciple? No. That might be somebody who's coming to know Jesus, you know, and maybe keeping him a bit at arm's length, but kind of interested to sort of hear from him. But in the same way that that's not good for our faith, just to go to church, nothing else, it's not good for our children's faith either, because it's once a week. I think it was David Watson who said, Jesus is either Lord of all or he's not Lord at all. Like,
yeah, that's
Jesus,
good.
You know, when we come to know Jesus, he takes everything, like we give him everything. We give him our whole lives. So how can you worship him on a Sunday and not bring him into your working life in the week? And how can you as a child hear about him on a Sunday but have no mention of him through the week? Like, our children need to know that Jesus is with them in the everyday, that Jesus is not just for them on a Sunday. Jesus is with them when their friends are turning away from them, you know, and they've got no one to play with at school and they don't know like what to do or whether anyone loves them. They need to know that Jesus is with them and for them in those moments. They need to know they've always got a friend in Jesus. They need to know that when they do wrong stuff, that Jesus forgives them and loves them and welcomes them into his family. They need to know that they have that opportunity for repentance and that God can turn their hearts around. They need to know when they're sick or when their friends are sick or their teachers are sick or their family is sick. They need to know that they can lift those concerns to God and he'll hear them and he'll answer them. They need to know that God is for them and with them in every step of their lives. And they're not going to know that if they only hear about him on a Sunday. So yes, he absolutely needs to be part of our week. And Parenting for Faith are great at doing this. They've worked out, I can't remember what it is, they've worked out the number of hours, you know, that everybody has with your child. And actually in a year, you know, even at the best church, you know, your kid is likely to have less than 100 hours a year in church or kids groups, you know, if they have a couple of hours a week. And that's best case scenario. You know, my kids have less than that. So a couple of hours a week. So 100 hours a year. You know, and then again, you have to go to the Parenting for Faith website for the actual hours. But, you know, they have so many hours in school, a lot of hours in school if they're going to traditional school. But the number of hours we have with them is immense. It's like 3,000 or so. It's crazy. And you think, I don't have those hours. You do, but those hours are spent, you know, tying shoelaces, telling them for the 10th time to put their trainers on the shoe rack, you know, these things that are like
looking for shoes mainly.
Oh my goodness, yes. Like a quarter of those hours definitely are spent looking for his things that he just drops everywhere. Like, yeah, because he didn't put them on the shoe rack when we asked him 10 times. Like, God is in those moments. You know, how are we going to bring God into those moments? It's not about finding an extra half hour in the day to have this amazing or singing or dancing family devotion or like this amazing craft activity that we set up. No, like let the kids workers do that. They're great at doing that. Kids leaders are absolutely brilliant at doing that. They can do the all singing or dancing stuff that our kids do need. Yeah. I'm not knocking that. That's brilliant. And I love our children's and youth leaders, but they are only supporting what we're doing at home and not the other way around. And so let what's happening on a Sunday be an add-on, an additional kind of oomph of joy in your child's devotional life rather than the only thing.
So we've said before that ultimately what we want is our kids to experience their own relationship with Jesus. That's the point of all of it, isn't it? So how can we encourage them to explore faith for themselves and kind of without us maybe?
Okay, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I think it just depends on their age and their capacity, I suppose, because I think for a few years, certainly we're doing it alongside them. We always want to encourage them to have their own relationship with Jesus, but it may be a few years before they're doing things like reading the Bible independently and that kind of thing. However, it starts young. I think as soon as we're reading to our kids, I mean, we read to our kids from like birth, don't we? We've got board books and, you know, bath books and crinkle books and all the rest of it. So make sure there's if you're reading to your child, make sure there's some Christian books in the mix. I've got loads of recommendations on my site, and you can filter down by age and topic and type of book. You can just look at all the board books or whatever. There's some beautiful books out there. Have those books in the pram, have them at in the cot if you have a book with them in the cot, or have a books out sort of at bedtime when you read to them or whatever. Just like have that habit, not just of reading Julia Donaldson, which we love, absolutely love, but reading some Christian books as well. And that can kind of morph when they're a bit older. That can morph into like a Bible where you read them, children's Bible, you read maybe a little bit more. And you might sort of start to get into a bedtime habit of that, where you sort of read a secular book and you read a bit of your Jesus Storybook Bible or your Lion Baby Bible or whatever. And so it kind of getting that kind of input into them when they're young, and their brains are so absorbent up to the age of 3, and they often can't communicate back what they're actually absorbing. So we think it doesn't matter, but it really does. So read to them, surround them with God's truth, and you don't have to have any books to do it. I just find it easier with books because the books have the word already. Just gives you words when you're tired and exhausted. So I think it's great, get parents, grandparents, whatever involved in buying these for your kids' birthdays and Christmas, and try and build up a little selection of lovely Christian resources. But always, as you talk with your child and as you pray initially for them and with them, and then gradually they will want to pray too. As you do that, always put this emphasis on like this. I believe that this is true, but Jesus asks us all to make decisions. You've got to believe, you've got to decide whether or not it's true. And you say that differently at different ages, depending on, how old they are and what they can understand and that kind of thing. But we're always saying to our children, and we say it a lot in our family, I think especially because my husband's a vicar, we've always been very clear at saying, look, you need to make your own decision. We're teaching you about what we believe. We think this is true. We believe this is to be true, and we have done for the last few decades. But this is up to you to test out and try out for yourself. And you need to make your own decision. And we're not going to force you to do that, but it's on you. We're not, we're going to love you, whatever the decision is. And the decision may go a little bit, up and down through your life or whatever, but that's on you. So I think just kind of emphasizing that, making prayer a very natural part of life. They've fallen over, they've bumped their knee, we can just say a quick prayer, can't we? And just modeling that actually that's what we do when we're sick. We pray. That's what we do when we need something. And also, I think a great thing as parents, we're always wanting to provide for our children, aren't we? And we want to do the best for our children, but with the best will in the world, we can't. Like, we're always going to let our children down, whether that's financially. We can't provide everything we would love to financially because, budgets don't stretch. Whether it's emotionally, we can't always be emotionally there or emotionally present. Physically, we have to be at work and we can't always be there when they need us or whatever. But all the time, just to be reminding them, actually, God's always there and God never lets you down. And when we make mistakes, we can say, sorry, I'm really sorry. I should not have snapped at that. And I responded like that. And that's nothing to do with you. That's to do with my own stuff that I'm trying to deal with. But God never does that. God always acts perfectly, and he's gentle and he's slow to anger and rich in love, and he's compassionate, and he loves you so much, and he's the one you can rely on. So yes, I want you to be able to rely on me and Dad, absolutely, but he's your rock. He's underneath me and Dad, like he's the solid one. When me and Dad fail you, as we will, the solid one. And I think the more we can point our kids to God as their security and their rock, the better.
That kind of exploration, though, always leads to questions, doesn't it? Which they're likely to bring to mum and dad. What is the toughest faith-related question any of your kids has ever asked you?
Gosh, there've been so many. We've had questions on the authority of the Bible. When my son, one of the twins, was 6, I think, he had the most lovely teacher at school, absolutely brilliant. But she was an atheist, and she was quite overt about being an atheist, which was interesting. And so he would come home and say things like, but we don't know if it's real, do we? We don't know that God's there, And that was the first time he'd started to really question it. And I was grateful, actually. I mean, it was maybe a little younger than I would have liked, but I was really grateful that he'd had that exposure to somebody who believes something entirely different to us. And I will say believe in a positive sense, because atheism is a belief system. At that point, I really wished that I had a book that would go through the reliability of the Bible for children. There are books for adults, but I haven't seen one for children. And in fact, it's something on the horizon. I won't say too much about it because
it's
we're not there
exciting,
yet.
because that is a really good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really believe in not patronizing our children and giving them quality information packaged in ways that they can access. And so, yeah, so we had a lot of, I really wanted a resource because I don't have all that information myself in my head. Like, I am not an archaeologist. I'm not a historian. I'm not a Bible scholar. So I could tell them little things that I've absorbed over the years, the evidence for the resurrection, or, I think they found parts of Noah's Ark on this mountain, that kind of thing, the bits I've absorbed, but it's so patchy. And that's where books really come into their own, because you can get something written by an expert and you can look it up together and learn together. But anyway, yeah, we face those sorts of questions. As our kids have got older, we've had questions about sexuality, sexual orientation, which have been interesting ones to answer because, we would share with them kind of our take on it and what we believe the Bible's saying into that, but also really to say to them, actually, not all Christians believe the same thing on that. And as they get older, we're wanting to prepare them, like, you will meet Christians who don't agree with mum and dad on this issue.
Yeah. And that's where things get really sticky, isn't it?
They do. But I think maybe good for our kids to kind of experience that and hear that now from us, rather than us just saying, right, this is the only opinion on that subject. And then they get to university or they get to the wider world or whatever, and they meet someone who thinks something different and it shatters their faith.
Yeah.
Suddenly.
Well, I mean, that's actually kind of the purpose of parenting altogether. Like, I'm just thinking about just normal worldly things. Like, we try and prepare them for the world. That's what our job is, isn't it? We're trying to prepare them to be adults in the world.
Yeah, exactly. And discipleship is exactly the same. We're trying to equip our children, maybe not when they're 5. We're not kind of, well, we are, but we're not seeing it in those ways. But certainly, with my 16-year-old, he's a couple of years away from, who knows what he's going to do at 18, but he's going to leave school and he's going to kind of start his adult life somewhere. And it might just be at home, but he's going to have so much more independence. And so he's very near that stage where he's going to be out in the world making his own decisions. He's already obviously fairly independent because this comes in stages. But I'm really thinking for him, like, who do I want him to be as a Christian young man in today's world? And what does he need to know? And what do I long for him? Like, if I could kind of picture him at 18 in this faith journey, like, where would I love him to be? And actually, that sounds very prescribed and prescriptive, and it's not like that. I'm largely letting him go on this journey with God, which praise God he is. But I think sometimes there are opportunities for us as parents to say, actually, this is something I think you should know, or this is something I wish I had known as an 18-year-old Christian. This is a way that I wish I had been prepared. My daughter the other day, she's 14. She said, I think God's calling me to lead. I've just felt this real desire to lead a session at youth group, and I'd really like to do it. And I've got a good idea. And she started talking to me about her idea, and I was like, flipping heck, like, I didn't learn that till I was 30.
Yeah.
This is amazing. She got it off TikTok. God bless TikTok.
Brilliant.
But I said, oh, that's great. And I said, she's quite independent, my daughter, but I said, me and Dad can help you, talk to youth leaders. I'm sure they'd be really up for you leading a session, and we can help you craft it. She said, oh, I know what I'm going to do. She's all like, I can do it. And it's like, yeah, no, that's great. I know you can. But just to say, we're here if you need us, and I don't want to kind of say, I know better than you, but there is that split. So well, I've been writing Bible studies and, running them for quite a few years now. I'd love to help you. I think it's a really good practical skill to be able to write a Bible study, right, and lead a Bible study. So if she can start on that journey at 14, then by 18, she will be a real asset to wherever she ends up at 18. So it's not a prescriptive, this is where I want my child to be and this is how I'm going to get them there. It's more where are they now? Where are they heading? And how can I as a parent help them and support them in that journey?
And I'm sure lots of the fabulous resources on the Hopefield Family website would help parents in that sort of journey of discipleship. Just tell me what makes a great resource for you. What are your tick boxes?
It depends what the resource is, obviously, but largely it needs to appeal, obviously, to children or young people. It needs to appeal to the target age. Sometimes things are too wordy. Publishers overestimate kids' attention span at different ages. I've had I review resources all the time. I have done for a decade or more. And sometimes I get a lovely resource. It's beautifully illustrated and it looks wonderful for sort of a 5 to 7-year-old. And you open it and you're like, this has got the text for an 8 to 11-year-old. You know?
Right, yeah.
And yet the design is not like a 10-year-old would not want to read this because of the design, but a 5-year-old would probably switch off as well. So I think there's a very sweet spot of like where the design and the content kind of match up, and it's got to be readable, it's got to be accessible, because if it's not, then kids will switch off. You know, it doesn't matter how brilliant it is, they'll switch off. So I would much rather my kids say, for example, when it comes to a devotional, I'd much rather them do a 5-minute devotional that they can actually maintain and stick with on a regular basis than try and do something that kind of lasts half an hour and then get bored and switch off. And
sometimes the length of things is a bit off-putting, isn't it? Or just not practical.
Yeah. And that's why I wrote my devotionals, because I couldn't find anything that was short but also had depth. Like, I want my kids to know the Bible, but I also am realistic about the time that they have and the time that they're going to want to put in every day. So I write devotionals. They don't actually read my devotionals because it is a bit weird reading something your mum wrote.
I know. Our kids never support us in stuff like that, do they? No.
Full disclosure, my kids do not read my devotionals, but that's okay. It's all right. I write them based on the experience I've had with my children doing different devotionals, and the ones that always work are the ones that are shorter, the ones that we can actually get into a habit of. The problem is with a lot of short ones, they tend to be moralistic. They tend to flit around the Bible. They tend to be a bit prescriptive. Sometimes it's a bit like a sort of meme, you know, sort of positive thought for your day. But, well, that's great. You know, the Bible's got a lot of very positive, encouraging things to say. It's also got some quite difficult things to grapple with. And I don't believe we should shield our children from those as they get older. So, yeah, I think that's the essence of a good resource for me. Something that's accessible, something that's targeted at the right age, and obviously something that shares something of God's words with children in a way that they can understand.
So talking of devotionals, tell us about your new book that's coming out at end of June, am I right? End of June?
Yeah. It's been out in the States for a few months and it's coming out in the UK at the end of June, the 25th, I think. So excited about this. It's called What Would Jesus Do? And it is 52 devotions for 10 to 12-year-olds, so tweens, really, or preteens, as they call them in the States. And you can do them with your child. They're designed to do with a child, but I've also kind of written them just in case a child doesn't have a parent to do them with, that they could do them on their own. So if you've got a child coming along to your kids group, for example, whose parents aren't Christians, they could read it on their own as well. But ideally, they would go through it with an adult, maybe a mentor from church as well. And they're split up into different sections. And I had fun thinking of these sections, things that tweens deal with and struggle with. So there's school, there's family, there's technology, there's puberty and growing up, there's mental and emotional health. There's lots of different kind of sections based on the kind of situations that those kids find themselves in. I did it very much based on my own twins, who were 10 when I was writing this book, 10 going on 11. And obviously I teach in that age group as well. I teach secondary. So I'm very used to sort of year 7, 8 age students. So I wrote something that would be accessible and relatable to them. So the idea is you can do it from start to finish if you want, or you can just dip in to whatever is the thing you're kind of facing at the moment. So if you're having some issues with friendships, then go to that section on friendships, and there'll be 5 different devotionals you can do on friendships. Say, if family things are difficult, go to family. If if you're just kind of getting your first phone maybe and navigating that, you could go to the tech section. Puberty starting, you get the idea. You can kind of sort of relevant. And I love speaking into these practical issues that age group are facing, because it's really difficult age, actually, 10 to 12.
Yeah, it's hard.
They start children and they end up as adolescents, and everything in between, and every child is doing that at different stages as well. But that makes things even more complicated. But I love the opportunity to speak into these practical issues with biblical wisdom. So there's a little Bible passage, there's a little reflection to read, there's 5 like conversation starters, questions that you can, will hopefully help you open up those conversations with your children, because it's not easy to talk about some of these things. But that's another kind of aim really of the devotional, that it kind of helps you start these conversations. We go to the Bible first and then we open up the conversation, and then there's a little prayer you can pray at the end as well. So I hope something that's relevant, something that's accessible, something that kind of feels a little bit more grown up maybe than children's devotionals, but is still very readable. And that's my desire for it.
Brilliant. Sounds great. So looking forward to that coming out June 25th. That's going to be available. I guess people can get it from your website. Is that right?
They will be able to, yeah. And yeah. I think pre-orders are open, I think, on Amazon as well. So if Amazon can go there.
Yeah. Perfect. I'll put all those links in the description and everything. But thank you so much for joining me this morning. It's been really, really great to chat with you, Lucy.
Thank you for having me.
So fab. Oh, it's fun, isn't it? It's fun. We should do it again. let's think of something else to talk about.
That sounds like a good plan.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.